Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Cheat on Me? Have fun getting set up on a man date. A few years back, I was dating this guy who I thought was everything a girl could ask for. He was smart, funny, hot. The whole package. For about 3 months I was in absolute heaven, so you can imagine how heartbroken I was when a friend told me about him DMing her on a dating site she frequented, asking for nudes. After a weekend of me crying on the couch with girlfriends, watching bad rom-coms, and binging on junk food, I decide that it's time for payback. The friend who warned me about him agrees to help me in my plan. She agrees to string him along, sending him nudes and flirting with him. All the while, I'm playing the oblivious little airhead, pretending to still be head over heels in love with him. Now important for later, my friend's name was Terry. Eventually my ex decides that pictures aren't enough for him. He needs the real thing. So he starts hitting her up for a hookup. She pretends to go along with it and makes it seem like she's on board. He asks for her number. Up until this point their primary means of communication has been through DMs, and she gives him the number of one of her homophobic ex-boyfriend, Jake. Now let's backtrack. Terry herself had just broken up with this guy recently, and we decided that as long as one cheating jerk was being punished, we might as well get the other. We went to a club where we knew he hung out. Sure enough, we find him with some friends. Terry goes up to him and pretends like she's so embarrassed to be doing this, but my friend thinks you're cute. The guy can't resist the chance to get in some cute girl's pants, and he can't resist the chance to rub it in his ex's face about what a catch he is. So he asks her to bring this friend over. Terry responds that this friend is too shy to come over right now, but she hopes it's okay if she gave her his number. She'd love to plan a nice quiet one-on-one date where they could get to know each other better. The guy shrugs and says sure, unaware that the friend in question ain't exactly a chick. Now important detail, this guy's middle name was Terrence. So he didn't think too much about who he thought was a shy girl referring to him as Terry in his texts. Jake, under the impression that this girl wants to go on a date, immediately starts asking about when they should meet up. My ex jumps at the chance, and immediately agrees to come meet him in Jake's apartment for that one-on-one bonding. Finally the big day arrives and my ex drives up to Jake's apartment. Thanks to Terry continuing to stay in touch with him through her DMs, she knows what day, time he's coming. She asked him when they'd agreed to meet, just to confirm, on the site, and we secretly park in front of the building in sunglasses and hats. We watch my ex swagger into the apartment, and come running out about 5 minutes later like a bat out of hell without a shirt, and 2 black eyes. Jake follows shortly after, screaming at him to get back here while struggling to pull up his pants. Apparently both men got a little overexcited waiting for my ex to come up, and were in the process of undressing. Jake in particular apparently couldn't wait for my ex to come up and had begun prepping himself before the lucky girl even arrived. When my ex knocked on the door, Jake opened it with his pants around his ankles, intending to surprise her with his one-eyed snake. Probably thought she'd be less likely to back out of the nasty in the event that he misinterpreted what her idea of getting to know him better was, if he was halfway to completion. We're not exactly sure exactly what happened after the moment of truth, but from what we could tell, when Jake realized he'd been set up on a date with a guy, his first instinct was to lash out at my ex, being the homophobe we knew him to be. Contrariwise, my ex, being an absolute wuss, took to his heels the moment things got violent. Then Jake probably decided to pursue him once he realized he'd forgotten to threaten my ex not to speak of this incident to anybody. Me and Terry are laughing so hard we almost don't notice the police arrive at the scene. One of Jake's neighbors must have heard him shouting and chasing my ex and reported a domestic disturbance. Then we get the added benefit of watching the police run after them. It was like watching a chase scene in Scooby-Doo. Once they finally caught the guys, they took them in for resisting arrest. It's now that me and Terry decide to make ourselves scarce. Then I angrily text my ex about how one of my friends saw him at Jake's place for a gay hookup and that I never signed up to be his beard. He doesn't even bother trying to explain before asking me to come bail him out. I tell him that we're over and block his number. To this day, I still don't know what happened afterwards, and neither does Terry. She blocked Jake's number and my ex on the dating site. The next one is titled, Revenge on Home Buyers. Sort of a story of 2 generations worth of revenge. Long story. Last year Thanksgiving, a group of us were together and a 30-something couple were talking about how much they were screwing over the owner of their soon-to-be new house. They had negotiated back and forth for a low price, had asked for several contingencies, had nickel and dimmed every last thing they could out of the inspection. At one point the new owner had even threatened to walk away from the deal. They were pretty proud of their tactics and how great their realtor was. One of the over 55 people finally laughed and said, "You aren't going to come out ahead like you think you are. There are consequences for your actions. Trust me, the seller always wins." She then told the story of her first house. She and her husband saved and scraped for years before they were able to buy a 100-year-old fixed-upper. This was in the 1990s and interest rates were higher. They bought during a seller's market. A major employer in their town closed, relocated. The town was plunged into a recession. No jobs, people moved away and housing prices dropped. 4 years later she and her husband are getting a divorce. It is now a buyer's market. Their house sits on the market for over a year. Finally, they get an offer. The buyer's realtor was related to them and was a shrew. The offer was less than what they paid for the house, and they had made several costly upgrades. The buyer tried asking for several changes and cash back at closing. After they did the inspection, they kept demanding for things to be done. They started with all the lower cost things, new smoke detectors, snaking a drain, and every 2 to 3 days, it was something else they wanted done. Finally, she and her husband had to tell her realtor they had no money left, they couldn't afford what the buyer was asking for, and they had no choice but to let the buyer out of the contract. The buyer backed off the repairs, but then wanted a couple pieces of furniture that were family antiques. When that didn't work, they wanted a lower price. She and her ex were about one step from a nervous breakdown and were convinced the buyers would walk. She told a few more stories about how the buyers and inspector were late an hour for the inspection. They brought their dogs in the house. She was very allergic. The dogs peed and pooped in an area that had new carpet, etc. She lived in a state where buyers and sellers all meet around a table in a lawyer's office for closing at the same time. Roughly an hour before that meeting, the sellers and realtor do a final walk-through. The night, early morning, while it was still dark before closing, she dumped around 100 gallons, 30 pounds of salt water on the grass and bushes. She turned down the temperature on the water heater. She replaced toilet paper rolls with almost empty ones. The next morning she and a very good friend sat a half a block away and waited for them to finish the inspection. Once they left, the friend went into the house. She waited a few minutes and drove to the closing. The new owners were about 10 minutes early to the signing and she was about 5 minutes late. She was very slow about signing the papers and a couple of times asked to have things repeated. While she was signing things, her friend was removing a couple of boards in the attic and adding a mama mouse and her new litter to the attic. He also removed some lattice work and threw a termite's nest under the front porch. Then he sprayed some sugar water around the coal chute and exterior basement, cellar entrance. Even she knew turning down the temperature on the water heater was petty, but she also hoped that even the one cold shower would start their day off lousy. She moved out of the area, but a year later when she was visiting, the grass had not recovered. She noticed the attic windows had all been replaced and a couple of old huge trees were trimmed back. 3 years later, there was a new front porch. This was an old house with a wrap-around front porch, so no cheap fix. She later heard the people who bought the house lost it through bankruptcy in less than 5 years. Fast forward to this year at Thanksgiving. We were smaller in number, but the same couple was there. They were a bit deflated. While the previous owners didn't do anything quite as bad as the woman in her 50s, it was a pretty tight-knit neighborhood. All of the neighbors had heard blow-by-blow details of their negotiation tactics. They were very cool to them upon meeting, and even a year later they don't feel very welcome. The neighbors will gather in the street and visit, now with some distancing. Whenever they try to walk over and join the conversation, the group breaks up. They don't think it's fair that the neighborhood kids don't play with their kids. One of the more blunt neighbors told the husband, "Your child is welcome to play with my kids in my house. But I don't want my kids around you. They are considering moving again." They aren't bad people, but it reminded me that buying a house may be a business transaction. But, like the woman said, there are consequences for every action. The next one is titled, "My Grandma Was Pretty Cool." My grandma and grandpa owned a small hot dog place in Seaside, OR called the Dog House, and a small motel right down the street from there till they retired in 1989, 4 years before I was born. One day when my dad was in high school, my grandmother, who was a very strict Roman Catholic, was home at the motel alone, taking care of their numerous dogs. They also raised dogs. She heard a knock on the door and went to open it. There was a man at the door, dressed in his Sunday best. "Hello, do you know about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ?" the man said as he pulled out a bunch of JW pamphlets. "Yes, actually I am a Catholic, I am already saved, I am sorry to waste your time but I really must be going." The man paused her. "I really must talk to you about this. Sir, this is a no soliciting sign on my door," and she pointed to the sign. "I must ask that you kindly leave." "But I..." Cue petty revenge. My grandma went to close the door but the man stubbornly put his foot in between to stop her from closing it. "Can you just listen to me?" My grandma, with a straight look on her face, said, "You have 5 seconds to remove your foot or I will break it." The man scoffed and still didn't remove it, still trying to force himself into the room. My grandma counted, and when he still didn't remove it, she slammed the extremely heavy door on his foot. "Ow, ow, ow." A scream of pain erupted from the man as a loud crack could be heard. "I told you I would break your foot, now leave, and if I see you on my property again, I will use my gun next time." The man quickly hobbled away. Not only did she not hear from him, no religion or salesman dared step foot on the property with intention of recruiting. You just don't mess with grandma. The next one is titled, "Make My Wife, Your Sister, Cry." Enjoy your new Netflix watch list and recommendations. So this just happened a few nights ago. My wife and I flew down to Florida to spend the week at my in-laws. We quarantined at home for a week before leaving and haven't left their house once we got here. My sister-in-law also came, just on a different flight. We eat, we drink, we are merry. Oh, and did I mention that we drink? By about 10 p.m. the ladies, wife, sister-in-law, and mother-in-law are starting to get feisty. The sister-in-law tries to defuse the situation by exerting power and talking down to everyone, mostly my wife, since she was actively upset. This just made everything worse. They start screaming at each other and my wife begins bawling. The sister is now actively antagonizing my wife. I finally step in and let them know how ducking stupid it all is. My wife and I head to our guest room. She quickly falls asleep but I'm wide awake. I turn on the TV and notice they have an ancient Roku connected. When I say ancient, I mean the processing speed was like late 90s Internet Explorer. I click on the Netflix and when the profiles pop up I see one for my sister-in-law. I proceed to spend the next hour adding random anime movies to her watch list as well as rating them 5 stars. That wasn't enough for me, so I also added and rated a bunch of romantic movies because she is 40 and single without any prospects. I didn't tell my wife either. Can't wait to hear her complain about it. The next one is titled, "Retract Your Bid? You won't win the other one." So this goes back almost 20 years. I started selling on eBay and at the time, I was making my way through a large sports card collection I bought. I felt the best way to get the most money was to divide the collection into team sets by year X. All the 1982 Falcons grouped together, all the 1987 Lions grouped together, etc. I believe at that point in eBay's history, you could only run auctions. So I had dozens of team lots listed from various years. I had a late 1970s Dallas Cowboys group. The bidding was competitive for most of the week that it was posted. But then on the last day, the price suddenly dropped. That isn't supposed to happen in an auction. I poked around and found that the high bidder retracted his bid, causing the price to fall to the next highest bidder. I searched some more and found that the guy pulled his bid from my listing and started bidding on a very similar listing from another seller. I could have shook my head and moved on, but I'm not like that. I crave justice. I added the retractor to my blocked bidders list and outbid him on the other lot of Cowboys cards. The icing on the cake was when the seller contacted me to arrange payment. I distinctly remember him asking me, "How does a Cowboys fan end up in Chicago?" I told him my reasons and he found it humorous enough he offered to ship the cards free of charge. I'm not sure if the other guy ever got the Cowboys cards he was looking for. I'd like to think I at least set him back a couple weeks and aggravated him just a little while doing it. The next one is titled, "Try to Blackmail Me? I'll Ruin Your Life." This happened a few years ago. I was maybe 26 at the time. I am a trans man, but present feminine and work as a professional dominatrix as a woman. I do a lot of work through a popular phone sex website. I had a client contact me on there and get my Skype ID. Sometimes clients want a cam chat there. It's not technically allowed by the site TOS, but they turn a blind eye because and he messaged me to negotiate a session. He complained about my rates, demanded I do stuff I'm not comfortable with. I don't get fully nude on cam calls. I don't talk about having clients touch me sexually. I don't do sessions as a sub, and eventually threatened me with bad reviews, and to report me to the site, and said I didn't want to show him my junk because I was a very nasty word for a trans woman. Ironic, I know. He called me every name in the book and I blocked him and thought nothing of it. I'd been with that site 5 years and made them hundreds of thousands over the course of them, so I wasn't worried. However, a little later he pops up again with a new account and screen name a few days later, threatening violence and accusing me of stealing from him. I screen cap this and send it to the site. They say there's nothing they can do about him creating multiple accounts but ban them as they occur. I block him again and think maybe he'll give up. Nope. A few days later there's a new account that talks in the same tone, demands the same crap, etc. So this time, with all the usernames he's used, I take to Google, and what do I find? But other PSOs who dealt with him complaining about him. I message some of them about what's happening, and one gets back to me super fast. She says he's been harassing her for years, telling her he hoped she'd have a miscarriage when she was pregnant, threatening her boyfriend. At this point I'm furious, not only on my behalf but on behalf of everyone else he's pulled this crap with. She'd tried to go to the cops, no help there, of course, but this idiot had given her a ton of personal info, from his full name, to his address. I am a pretty good internet detective thanks to my line of work, so I start Googling and putting together info. I find everything, and I mean everything, from his mum's name, the date of his dad's death, to his girlfriend's name, to the shitty band he played in high school, where he works, and who his landlord is. I call everyone politely informing them of what this little crap is up to. His mum, his girlfriend, his everybody. I call his girlfriend at work just to make sure she gets it. He contacts me on Kik, demanding a response, and threatening to sue me for harassment. I laugh my butt off and explain how that doesn't work and that if he contacts me again I'll sue him for harassment and show him the statutes on it where we live. You have to tell the person to stop contacting you before it can be harassment. I'd told him multiple times to stop bothering me, but he'd only ever demanded that I do talk to him. After that I did stop contacting him, but I gave all the info I'd dug up to the other PSOs to do with as they liked. Last I checked he was living with his brother in a truly shitty looking apartment and tweeting about how no one will hire him because people are mean, and about how much he hates women. Edit to clarify, before this he seemed to have a pretty nice life, pretty girlfriend working in real estate, a job in tech and was renting a pretty nice, big house in a nice town. I googled him just now and there are multiple places where if you Google his name it shows you just what kind of person he is. The last one is titled, "Park in My Driveway? Hope you plan to stay the night." This was several years ago when I was living at my parents' house still. I was around 19 at the time. I used to drive an old pickup truck, which I always parked in the street in front of my house as my parents put one car in the garage and the other in driveway on the other side, this way no one was ever blocked in. Our old neighbors used to always have large gatherings of family and friends. Seemed like once a month I would come home and find our street lined with cars all at their house. One weekend, my parents went out of town, which left the driveway open so I parked in it, because why not? This was on a Saturday. I realized that our neighbors were having people over. No big deal, happens regularly, they are polite and quiet. Their guests will sometimes park close to being in front of our driveway, which is annoying when trying to back out with cars basically surrounding it on all sides. I decided to run and pick myself up some dinner around probably 6 to 7 p.m. I was gone maybe half an hour. When I get back, I noticed that someone was parked right smack in the middle of our driveway. It wasn't just any car though. It was a G-Wagon. I had seen this SUV several times before, usually as one of the cars parked close to the front of our driveway, but this time, they decided to park in our driveway. Could I have gone and asked them to move the car and park elsewhere? Of course I could have. Did I? No, instead I parked my truck across the entire entrance to the driveway, blocking them in. After a few hours I get a knock at the door. Guess who it is? The car's owner, having the gall to ask me to move my truck so they can leave. I could have moved it, no problem. Instead, I told them as I had already gone and picked up dinner, I had no reason to leave until at least the next afternoon. They asked if I could just move it as they wanted to go home. I told them again, I had no reason to leave and my truck is really loud and I didn't want to disturb the other neighbors by starting it so late at night and they were welcome to come back for it tomorrow. I left the truck there until around noon the next day. Not sure how they got home as this was before Uber and there were no taxis in the area and they were one of the last vehicles to leave the party, but that ain't my problem. Should have thought about that before parking in my driveway. Thanks for listening.